Creative actions, that are actions original and functional, are thought to emerge from individuals' attempts to adapt to the changing environment to satisfy the current constraints. The importance of such adaptivity is highlighted in daily activities, physical exercise, and sports which are characterized by a constant change in constraints. In this respect, Bernstein, one of the pioneers of movement science, described motor skill as the ability to solve one or another type of motor problem, that is, as the capacity to find adaptive solutions across circumstances that are never exactly the same. Accordingly, learning new motor skills implies a continuous search to adaptively solve a motor problem rather than acquiring one single optimized movement pattern. From this perspective, it is during this search process, wherein the individual aims to satisfy constraints, that creative actions emerge. Methods. 42 right-handed participants volunteered to undertake the study consisting of a 21-person sample per group. The experiment was conducted in a laboratory, equipped with a hanging boxing bag which was instrumented to measure peak impact force. The peak impact force of each strike was determined by computing the average accelerations of 2 internal accelerometers each positioned at the top and bottom of the bag and along the longitudinal axis of the bag center. The instrumented bag system provided immediate feedback to participants of the most forceful strike overall and the current strike force both with respect to a target force. The target force was individually determined for each participant, which was relative to their maximal punching force producing capability when striking with the right hand. The bag was positioned at the front and center of the striking area, which was denoted by tape on the ground. A target to strike was positioned at the center and offset to the left side of the bag. Participants were required to wear loose sports shorts, shin pads designed for kickboxing, one large-sized standard boxing glove on the right hand and one modified boxing glove on the left hand, which was significantly increased in size, containing soft foam padding and cotton to significantly reduce the effectiveness of the glove. Working memory task. A random number generator was used to prepare 2 different sets of number sequences for each group. The same sets of numbers were used for each participant of the corresponding condition. Each integer was a single digit ranging between 0 and 9. To verify if participants were paying attention to the memory task and to gauge their perception of difficulty relative to the striking task, participants were asked to rate these on a scale from 1 to 5. Procedure and design. Participants were then equipped and performed a 5-minute warm-up consisting of shoulder rolls, abdominal twists, leg swings, and arm extension and flexion. Participants were then required to perform pre-test strikes. Specifically, participants were required to complete 10 maximal strikes with the right hand against a target on the bag directly in front. The maximal score was used to calculate the target force for the striking task. Following the pretest, participants were then told they were to be involved in 2 tasks to be performed concurrently, the striking task and working memory task, and they were informed that the target force was achievable. Different coordination solutions included the possibility that the left and right hands and feet, elbows and knees, or head were used. Additional coordination solutions were also identified during the course of the experiment and included double hands, facing away from the bag and spin and strike. On the other hand, different control solutions included the possibility that changes in the part of the limb used reflected an effort to further optimize the coordination solution by exploring different ways of improving impact force with the same limb. The notational approach is detailed in the table. To exemplify, the figure shows that changing the coordination solution from a left-handed strike to a right-hand strike involves a different coordination solution. This assumes that striking a boxing bag can be done in qualitatively different ways and that using a different limb will necessarily require qualitatively different spatial relationships between the end effector and the target on the boxing bag. In plain language, different coordination solutions might correspond to different techniques or action categories. Quantifying flexible and persistent creativity and exploration. Linking variability in coordination and control to creativity assumes that creative actions can emerge out of variability in either coordination and control. This suggests that flexible creativity in the kickboxing task can be quantified by counting the different coordination solutions used to strike the bag. Furthermore, traditionally, persistent creativity is measured by the average number of solutions derived from one and the same category. We operationally measured persistent creativity by quantifying the number of different ways each coordination solution varied at the level of control. In the kickboxing task, persistent creativity was measured in terms of the number of different ways the end effector was used to strike the bag. Outcome variables. Data. We quantified several traditional creativity indicators as well as to quantify exploration at the levels of coordination and control. Specifically, the notational and impact force data were then used to compute the following indicators. Results. Number recall, perception of mental strain, and task validation. Significant differences in error arose between the high and low working memory load conditions in terms of number recall success, where the high working memory load group were less successful than the low working memory load group. Significant differences were also observed between the high working memory load group and the low working memory load group for the perception of recall task difficulty for the working memory task, where the high working memory load group perceived the recall task as significantly more difficult. A significant difference was also observed between working memory conditions for the participants' perception of attention to the number retention during striking, where the high working memory group showed a significantly higher level of perceived attention to the number recall task. In order to clarify that the task design had good construct validity as a convergent task, the limb used for the first strike across all participants was examined alongside the limb used for the final strike. To this end, the left panel of the figure shows the percentage use of the left arm relative to all other actions for the first and last strike. The relative functionality was also determined for the left and right limbs and is presented in right panel of the figure. The right graph indicates that the right limb supported more forceful strikes. The left graph shows that most participants started by using their left hand, but by the end of the experiment had begun using alternative coordination solutions, indicating that participants were capable of performing alternative actions, an important condition of convergent tasks. Effect of working memory on task success, search behavior, and creative outcomes. The table summarizes the outcomes of planned comparisons between the high and low working memory load groups. None of these comparisons for differences were found significant and the observed effect sizes were small. Descriptive overview of actions used and the frequency of attempts between high and low working memory load groups. The figure shows the frequency distribution in descending order of strikes used and their label. In overview, across the entire experiment a total of 3,748 strikes were observed with 39 distinct actions. The most frequently occurring action for both groups was to strike the target while facing it with the palm of the left hand, this action occurring a total of 1,629 times. The next most frequent action was to strike the target while facing it with the right arm using the small finger side of the hand. This action was used 794 times. There were no statistical differences in terms of which action was most frequently used as a function of working memory load. The figure shows how many actions each individual used as a function of working memory load, where in summary terms the high working memory load group showed a median of 98 and the low working memory load group showed a median of 63. Outcomes on task success indicators between high and low working memory load groups. Referring to the figure, this graph indicates which participants failed at the task. 9 individuals failed in the high working memory load group and 12 failed in the low working memory load group. Level of task success was not statistically different between groups, nor was the level of functionality. Outcomes on creativeness indicators between high and low working memory load groups. There were no significant differences between working memory load groups on outcomes for the creativity indicators. There were also no apparent trends in outcomes based on working memory group comparisons. Outcomes on search indicators between high and low working memory load groups. There were no significant differences with respect to the search indicator outcomes between the high and low working memory load groups. As with the creativity outcomes, there were also no apparent trends in outcomes based on working memory group comparisons. In overview, independent of group membership, a median of 27.2% of actions were with the right arm. The median bout length showed that actions were used one after the other, a median of 2.5 times before switching to another solution. Exploratory efficiency indicates that 9.8% median of actions were unique. The coordination switching ratio showed that for each action executed, 17.8% median of these were to switch to a different coordination solution. And, finally, the control switching ratio showed that during bouts where the same coordination solution was used, a median of 7% of these involved switching to a different control solution. Follow-up comparisons between successful and unsuccessful participants. As there were no significant effects of working memory loading on task success, creativity outcomes, and search, we carried out additional exploratory analyses. When examining the data in the figure 6b, it was apparent that participants who struck the bag more frequently were more likely to fail. Indeed, individuals who failed were strongly and statistically more likely to use more strikes compared to those who succeeded. These results led us to contrast search behavior and creativity by considering the role of task success as an independent variable. These results are summarized in the table, and reveal a number of significant differences. Statistically significant differences between groups formed on the basis of success and task failure were uncovered across functionality, creativeness, and exploratory efficiency. In terms of functionality, across all actions produced by successful participants, the bag was hit with a mean force of 49.9% relative to the target force. This was statistically higher than the group that failed, who showed a mean of 34.1% relative to the target force. The likelihood of a creative action occurring in the successful group was significantly higher than the unsuccessful group. Additionally, exploration efficiency was significantly higher in the successful group. Notably, a number of outcomes also showed trends to significance. These trends suggested that participants who succeeded showed less persistence, tended to use their right arm, and tended to more often switch which coordination solution was used. The fact that the exploration efficiency was higher in the successful group suggests that the faster participants discovered a solution that could produce sufficient force, the more likely they were to succeed. We, therefore, also examined in more detail the creative actions developed as well as the first and last actions used by participants grouped according to success or failure. The figure suggests that most of the creative and functional solutions involved the use of the limbs on the right side of the body. The figure suggests an interaction effect such that the successful group tended to use the left and right side equally, whereas the unsuccessful group preferred to use the left side and were less inclined to use right side solutions. This preference was compounded when comparing groups at the first and last strike. Those who succeeded were 5.8 times more likely to use a limb on their right side from the outset compared to the group that failed. Furthermore, the group that succeeded were 4.5 times more likely to finish the task with a limb on the right side compared to the group that failed.